因为其实我是那种想读书，但是平常没有什么时间读，那就你们陪我读书吧。新瑶，你走晕了，今天你真的走晕了，因为这个是绝对让你睡着的，你睡不着，你绝对会睡着，我就只能说你绝对会睡着，你是100%会睡着的吧，我就只能这样说吧，对，100%会睡着，100%会睡着。对，今天的话呢，OK，先开始吧。对，其实今天也是开完了，因为我自己在手机没电，哭哦。啊，现在是正好失眠。嗨，大家好，晚上好，这里是非手把音质的一起上你们的合同Fugu Aurelius 的事。那其实为什么今天到底要做什么呢？就很简单，我来读书。我会一边念着，可能会写一些笔记什么的。但是重点呢，就是你们要听我念书。那今天我们听的呢，就是英国的乌言对，也不能说床边故事啦，因为我们今天读的就是 John Stuart Mills 写的 utilitarianism， 就是功利主义的雏形。因为我先说一下背景，因为我先说一下背景哦，因为呢，其实你可以把它当成一个唯心论和唯心和唯物论的一个雏形吧。utilitarianism 就是什么呢？功利主义。但是听这个名词的话，可能会觉得很负面，对吧？就是你这个人很功利，就是他很自私的意思，对吧？但是实际上呢，在道德伦理学来说呢，反而其实它不是一个这么自私的东西。对，那这个功利主义呢，就是它的雏形就是从一开始追求善这一点，慢慢演化成我们开始要怎么去计算一个的效益，从一个结果论的一个基础，来得出一个我们怎么样去评价一件事情是好的还是坏的呢？今天的话，我们就来念这个的《On Utilitarianism》by John Stuart Mill。今天是英文台了，听不懂的话也就当是睡眠台吧。拍谢。这样我再设定一下我今天说话可能会比较没有这么凶吧，也不会这么吵，是因为我们是需要安静的来讲述。你们有听不懂的，有想讨论，有听懂而且想要讨论的话，也可以跟我说。但是今天的话还是英文台哦。OK，3、2、1。Good evening, guys. Now, okay, where did I put that PDF? Bear with me a moment. John Stuart Mill, not basic German. John Stuart Mill, utilitarianism. Please click. Nice. Okay. Chapter 1. General remarks. There are few circumstances among those which make up the present condition of human knowledge, more unlike what might have been expected, or more significant of the backward state in which speculation on the most important subjects still lingers, than the little progress which has been made in the decision of the controversy respecting the criterion of right and wrong. From the dawn of philosophy, the question concerning the summum bonum, or, what is the same thing, concerning the foundation of morality, has been accounted the main problem in speculative thought, has occupied the most gifted intellects and divided them into sects and schools, carrying on a vigorous warfare against one another. Hello， 吃爽安安。And after more than 2,000 years, the same discussion continues. Philosophers are still ranged under the same contending banners, and neither thinkers nor mankind at large seems nearer to be unanimous on the subject. Then, when the youth Socrates listened to the old Protagoras and asserted if Plato's dialogue be grounded on a real conversation. 等一下，这边有干嘛 ？OK。BGM 会不会太大声？或者如果说话会不会太大声？你们也可以说哦。The theory of utilitarianism against the popular morality of the so-called sophists. It is true that similar confusion and uncertainty, and in the some case similar discordance, exists respecting the first principle of all the sciences, not expecting that which is deemed the most certain of them, mathematics, without much impairing, generally indeed without impairing at all, the trustworthiness of the conclusion of those sciences, and apparent anomaly, the explanation of which is that the detailed doctrines of a science are not usually deduced from, nor depend for the evidence upon, what's called its first principle. Were it not so, there would be no science more precocious, or whose conclusion were more insufficiently made out than algebra, which derives none of its certainty from what are commonly taught to learners as its elements, since these, as laid down by some of its most eminent teachers, are as full of fictions as English law, and of mysterious as theology. The truths which are ultimately accepted as the first principle of a science are really the last results of metaphysical analysis practiced on the elementary notion with which the science is conversant, and their relation to the science is not that of foundation to an edifice, but of roots to a tree, which may perform their office equally well though they be never dug down to and exposed to light. But though, in science, the particular truths precede the general theory, the contrary might be expected to be the case with a practical art, such as morals or legislation. All actions is for the sake of some end, and rules of action, it seems natural to suppose, must take their whole character and color from the end to which they are subservient. When we engage in a pursuit, a clear and precise conception of what we are pursuing would seem to be the first thing we need, instead of the last we are to look forward to. A test of right and wrong must be the means, one would think, or ascertaining what is right or wrong, and not a consequence of having already ascertained it. The difficulty is not avoided by having recourse to the popular theory of a natural faculty, a sense or instinct, informing us of right and wrong. For, besides that, the existence of such a moral instinct is itself one of the matter in dispute. Those believers in it who have any pretension to philosophy have been obliged to abandon the idea that it discerns what is right or wrong in the particular case in hand, as our other sense discern sight or sound actually present. Our moral faculty, according to all those of its interpreters who are entitled to the name of thinkers, supplies us only with the general principle of moral judgment. It is a branch of our reason, not of our sensitive faculty, and must be looked to for the abstract doctrines of morality, not for perception of it in the concrete. The intuitive, no less than what may be termed the inductive, school of ethics insists on the necessity of general laws. They both agree that the morality of an individual action is not a question of direct perception, but of the application of a law to an individual case. They recognize also to a great extent that same moral laws, but differ as to their evidence and the source from which they derive their authority. According to the one opinion, the principles of morale are evidence a priori, requiring nothing to command assent except that the meaning of the terms be understood. According to other doctrine, right and wrong, as well as truth and falsehood, are questions of observation and experience, but both hold equally that morality must be deduced from the principles, and intuitive school affirm as strongly as the inductive that there is a science of morals. Yet they seldom attempt to make out a list of a priori principles which are to serve as the premises of the science. Still more rarely do they make any effort to reduce those various principles to one first principle or common ground of obligation. They either assume the ordinary precepts of morals as of a priori authority, or they lay down as the common groundwork of those maxioms. Some generality much less obviously authoritative than the maxims themselves, and which has never succeeded in gaining popular acceptance. Yet to support their pretensions, there ought either to be some one fundamental principle or law at the roots of all morality, or if there be several, there should be a determinate order of precedence among them, and that one principle or the rule for deciding between the various principles when they conflict ought to be self-evident. To inquire how far the bad effects of this deficiency have been mitigated in practice, or to what extent the moral beliefs of mankind have been vitiated or made uncertain by the absence of any distinct recognition of an ultimate standard, would imply a complete survey and criticism of past and present ethical doctrine. It would, however, be easy to show that whatever steadiness or consistency these moral beliefs have attained has been mainly due to the tacit influence of a standard not recognized, although the non-existence of an acknowledged first principle has made ethics not so much a guide as a consecration of men's actual sentiments. Still, as men's sentiments, both of favor and of aversion, are greatly influenced by what they suppose to be the effects of things upon their happiness, the principle of utility, or as Bentham lately called it, the greatest happiness principle, has a large share in forming the moral doctrines even of those who most scornfully reject its authority. Nor is there any school of thought which refuses to admit that the influence of action on happiness is a most material and even predominant consideration in many of the details of morals, however unwilling to acknowledge it as the fundamental principle of morality and the source of moral obligation. I might go much further and say that to all those a priori moralists who deem it necessary to argue at all, utilitarian arguments are indispensable. It is not my present purpose to criticize these thinkers, but I cannot help referring for illustration to a systematic treatise by one of the most illustrious of them, The Metaphysics of Ethics. Lady was in the room just now. Sorry. Wait, what's wrong to my goddamn? Is it not connecting again? Please tell me no. It's so stupid. Ah, no wonder I have such a silly look. Can I move? Can I move? Am I moving? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Why is my not working? What the heck? Is it connecting? Okay, it's connecting. Okay, thank you very much. Where was I? The Metaphysics of Ethics by Kant. This remarkable man, whose system of thought will long remain one of the landmarks in the history of philosophical speculation, thus, in the treatise in question, lay down an universal first principle as the origin and ground of moral obligation, and as this, so act, that the rule on which thou actest would admit of being adopted as a law by all rational beings. But when he begins to deduce from this precept any the actual duties of morality, he fails, almost caustically, to show that there would be any contradiction, any logical, not to say physical, impossibility in the adoption by all rational beings of the most outrageous moral rules of conduct. All he shows is that the consequences of their universal adoption would be such as no one would choose to incur. On the present occasion, I shall, without further discussion of the other theories, attempt to contribute something towards the understanding and appreciation of the utilitarian or happiness theory, and towards such proofs as it is suspectable of it. It is evident that this cannot be proved in the ordinary and popular meaning of the term. Questions of ultimate ends are not amenable to direct proof. Whatever can be proved to be good must be so by being shown to be a means to do something admitted to be good without proof. The medical art is proved to be good by its conducing to health. But how is it possible to prove that health is good? The art of music is good for the reason, among others, that it produces pleasure, but what proof is it possible to give that pleasure is good? If then it is asserted that there is a comprehensive formula, including all things which are in themselves good, and that whatever else is good is not so as an end, but as a mean, the formula may be accepted or rejected, but is not a subject of what is commonly understood by proof. We are not, however, to infer that its acceptance or rejections must depend on blind impulse or arbitrary choice. There's a larger meaning of the word proof, in which this question is as amenable to it as any other of the disputed questions of philosophy. The subject is within the cognizance of the rational faculty, and neither does that faculty deal with it solely in the way of intuition. Consideration may be presented capable of determining the intellect either to give or withhold its assent to the doctrine, and this is equivalent to proof. We shall examine presently of what nature are this consideration, in what manner they apply to the case, and what rational grounds, therefore, can be given for accepting or rejecting the utilitarian formula. But it is a preliminary condition of rational acceptance or rejection that the formula should be correctly understood. I believe that the very imperfect notion ordinarily formed of its meaning is the chief obstacle which impedes its reception, and that could be cleared even from only the grosser misconception. The question would be greatly simplified, and a large portion of its difficulties removed. Before, therefore, I attempt to enter into philosophical grounds which can be given for assenting to the utilitarian standard, I shall offer some illustration of the doctrine itself, with the view of showing more clearly what it is, distinguishing it from what is not, and disposing of such of the practical objection to it as either originates in or are closely connected with mistaken interpretation of its meaning. Having thus prepared the ground, I shall afterwards endeavour to throw such light as I can upon the question considered as one of the philosophical theory. OK， 他其实刚才说了什么呢？就是一大堆的前言，就是说，其实也是一堆废话了，就真的是一堆废话了。跟老师说是一堆废话啊，有兴趣的话其实可以去看，但是我就觉得真的你说有什么很，因为它就是主要是暂时就说我们谈道德 when we talking about philosophy, it comes to the term moral. No matter which school you take, people are trying to find a common ground or so-called a first principle. Yeah, no matter what stance you are, there must be someone as an a priori or like the first principle that override any other rule to determine what is good or bad. Yeah, and he just say, okay, I am in full support in utilitarianism, and then that's it. Yeah, and he did mention the word Kant on his Metaphysics of Ethics of Rations. Great writer, but he is such a huge figure that even my philosophy professor in uni say philosophy can be divided into two eras, pre-Kant and post-Kant, because he is such a great man on ration, on metaphysics, on moral. He built up such a huge theory that a lot of people, those who after him, more or less in some sense, will have to mention him in their own writing. You can agree, you can disagree, but he is such a huge influence that he nurtured a huge generation, or the later generation, and kind of shaped how it's being evolved. Okay, but today Kant is not the point. I do want to read Kant. This book is just so fake. Like, I can kill someone with that book, you know. I remember, and it's like really expensive, and it's okay when it comes to like, yeah, and I'm really not a metaphysics guy. I'm not someone who, you know, understand that do we know something or something that is like beyond us. I'm not that kind of guy that can grasp the idea easily. So for me, might not now, maybe later, but not now. Okay, give me a moment. Okay, we just finished chapter 1. It's kind of like a brief introduction on where Mill is on, what stance he is on when it comes to moral, which he said it's utilitarianism is something that indispensable, undeniable, and being misconcepted. In that part, I do agree. Even in modern worlds, a lot of people who never studied philosophy, when they think about, okay, utilitarianism must be, you know, selfish, ambiguous, and then like jungle rule, not jungle rule, that there are some kind of rule, but that rule it's not really that how would it say, at least not in a traditional Eastern world sense good. But if you study it a little bit harder, you can see the marvelous of it and the weakness of it. I do read some books, but not this one. This is my first time to read this book, yeah? Literature regarding to utilitarianism, and surprisingly it is quite selfless. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to chapter 2 after I had a sip of water, yeah? Okay. A passing remark is all that needs to be given to the ignorant blunder of supposing that those who stand up for utility as the test of right and wrong use the term in that restricted and merely colloquial sense in which utility is opposed to pleasure. An apology is due to the philosophical opponents of utilitarianism for even the momentary appearance of confounding them with anyone capable of so absurd a misconception, which is the more extraordinary inasmuch as the contrary accusation of referring everything to pleasure, and that too in its grossest form, is another of the common charges against utilitarianism. I need to put some notes in here. I'm a stereotype. I rather say they haven't read the book and they judge it by the name, and with that negative footing on utility, or in Chinese 功利, become with such a negative footnote when people relating them to what I called to the philosophical theory, they already have a priori or like a preference over it. Okay, so it's what's not utility? So here he raised a good questions, because utility, it's not against pleasure, it's one extreme, yeah, and it's also not only pleasure, which is another extreme but common misconception, yeah. Okay, where was I? As another common charges against, and as has been pointedly remarked by an able writer, the same sorts of persons, and often the very same persons, denounce the theory as impracticably dry when the word utility precedes the word pleasure, and as too practically voluptuous when the word pleasure precedes the word utility. Those who know anything about the matter are aware that every writer, from Epicurus to Bentham, who maintained the theory of utility mean by it not something to be contradistinguished from pleasure, but pleasure itself, together with exemption from pain. Wait a minute. Let's see. And instead of opposing the useful to the agreeable or the ornamental, have always declared that the useful means these, among other things. Yet the common herd, including the herd of writer, not only in newspapers and periodicals, but in books of weight and pretensions, are perpetually falling into this shallow mistake, having caught up the word utilitarian, while knowing nothing whatever about it but its sounds, they habitually express by its the rejection or the neglect of pleasure in some of its form, of beauty, of ornament, or of amusement. Nor is the term thus ignorantly misapplied solely in disparagement, but occasionally in compliment, as though it implied superiority to frivolity, and the mere pleasure of the moment, and this perverted use is the only one in which the word is popularly known, the one from which the new generation are acquiring the sole notion of its meaning. Those who introduced the word, but who had for many years continued it as a distinctive appellation, may well feel themselves called upon to resume it. By doing so, they can hope to contribute anything toward rescuing it from this utter degradation. So what happens is here, a lot of people misunderstand this word and think this is either, if they put pleasure, like utility over pleasure, which is not utilitarianism should be, it would become impracticable because no one can. It's against human nature. But if they put it in the other extreme, pleasure over utility, then it becomes, yes, it's practicable, but it becomes something that it's so degrading, which is not right. And these are the two main opposition or rejection of this theory at that time. And in here, Mills just say no, you just misunderstand that. Yeah? The creed, which accepts as the foundation of morals utility or the greatest happiness principle, holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So here, Mark really laid out the fundamentals of here. It's what is right means promote happiness, yeah, and wrong means reverse of happiness. You can call it pain, you can call it sadness, but still, it's something that opposite of happiness. But by happiness, it's intended pleasure and the absence of pain. So here they explains what is happiness is intended pleasure, intended, yeah, and absence of pain. By unhappiness, it's pain and the privation of pleasure. To give a clear view of the moral standard set up by the theory, much more requires to be said, in particular what things it includes in the idea of pain and pleasure, and to what extent is left an open question. But this supplementary explanation did not affect the theory of life on which this theory of morality is grounded, namely that pleasure and freedom from pain are the only things desirable as ends, and that all desirable things, which are as numerous in the utilitarian as in any other scheme, are desirable either for the pleasure inherent in themselves, or as means to the promotion of pleasure and the prevention of pain. Let me reread this, but it's nothing for your life which is grounded. Name the pleasure. Pleasure, pain, the pleasure, the question. Okay. So further explanation or definition. It's an open question, but still, it won't affect it won't affect the principle of greater happiness as the fundament or foundation of this utilitarianism theory. Okay? 可以看它到底有几页？121页，靠背哦。Now such a theory of life excites in many minds, and among them in some of the most estimable in feeling and purpose, inveterate dislike. To suppose that life has, as they express it, no higher end than pleasure, no better and nobler objects of desire and pursuit, they designated as utter mean and groveling, as a doctrine worthy only of swine, to whom the followers of Epicurus were, at a very early period, contemptuously likened. And modern holders of the doctrine are occasionally made the subjects of equally polite comparison by its German, French, and English assailants. When first attacked, the Epicureans have always answered that it's not they, but the accusers who represent human nature in a degrading light. Since the accusations suppose human beings to be capable of no pleasure except those of which swine are capable. If this supposition were true, the charge could not be gainsaid, but would then be no longer an imputation. For if the source of pleasure were precisely the same to human beings and to swine, the rule of life which is good enough for the one be good enough for the other. The comparison of the Epicurean life to that of beasts is felt as degrading, precisely because beast pleasure do not satisfy a human being conception of happiness. Human beings have faculties more elevated than the animal appetites, and when once made conscious of them, do not regard anything as happiness which does not include the gratification. I do not, indeed, consider the Epicureans to have been by any means faultless in drawing out their scheme of consequence from the utilitarian principle. To this in any sufficient manner many Stoic as well as Christian elements required to be included. But there is no known Epicurean theory of life which does not assign to the pleasure of the intellect, of the feelings and imagination, and of the moral sentiments a much higher value as pleasure than to those of mere sensation. It must be admitted, however, that utilitarian writers in general have placed the superiority of mental over bodily pleasure chiefly in the greater permanency, safety, uncostliness, and etc. of the former. That is, in their circumstantial advantage rather than in their instinct nature. And on all those points, utilitarians have fully proved the case. But they might have taken the other, and as it may called, higher ground with entire consistency. It is quite compatible with the principle of utility to recognize the fact that some kinds of pleasure are more desirable and more valuable than others. Okay, here he drew two things. So, attacker from those who don't think that utilitarianism is a good theory is degrading human. So if we're seeking pleasure, then what makes us different from animal? Like a pig. Alright? Degrading humanity. Because animals also think pleasure overall. Yeah? But in here, rebuttal is we are not the same. Yes, we do have we both human and animal like a pig. Think pleasure it's above all to be the first principle of moral. However, the definition of pleasure to human definition of pleasure to human and animal, it's different. So in this sense, our pleasure, there are different level of pleasure. Some might be a higher level, some might be in a low level, some might be a bit posh, some might be a bit cockney. So we have different level, different kind of pleasure that we can rank them accordingly. So in that case, yeah, some kind of pleasures are more desirable and more valuable than others. Yeah? It would be absurd that while in estimating all other things, quality is considered as well as quantity, the estimation of pleasure should be supposed to depend on quantity alone. Yeah? So, well, quantity of pleasure, not here, quantity of pleasure is not better than quality. Yeah? Oh god, it's so... If I'm asked what I mean by difference of quality in pleasures, or what makes one pleasure more valuable than another, merely as a pleasure, except its being greater in amount, there is but one possible answer. Of two pleasures, if there be one with which all and almost all who have experience of both give a decided preference, irrespective of any feeling of moral obligation to prefer it, that is the more desirable pleasure. If one of the two is, by those who are competently acquainted with both, placed so far above the other that they prefer it, even though knowing it to be attended with a greater amount of discontent, and would not resign it for any quantity of other pleasure which the nature is capable of, we are justified in ascribing to the preferred enjoyment a superiority in quality, so far outweighing quantity as to render it, in comparison, a small amount. So in here, you just say how to define that it is really, really, really personal thing, because it's okay. You might get tiny bits, so treat it like money. Yeah, in one hand you get 100 coins, which is like $1. On the other hand, you got $300 bill. Which one would you pick? In quantity wise, you might say, oh, I will just get the coins. Got 100 coins, come on. But in terms, just imagine, yeah, people would definitely pick the $300 bills, yeah, $300 bills, yeah. Why? Because they give more pleasure, or they're worth more when it comes to calculation of values, even though they are like 100 coins versus 3 bills, yeah. So similar to picking pleasure. So what pleasure is good? It's for those who experience that and with a proper mindset, like he's not crazy, just that $100 worth of coin is a bunch of tiny little pleasure, while $300 bills are a greater pleasure that worth more in itself. Yeah, then you do the calculation, then you realize even I only got 3 pleasure, but that pleasure in amount, it's greater than the 100 coins of pleasure. That's it. God, the mouth is so dry. Now, it is an unquestionable fact that those who are equally acquainted with and equally capable of appreciating and enjoying both to give a most marked preference to the manner of existence which employs these higher faculties. Few human creatures would consent to be changed into any of the lower animals for promise of the fullest allowance of a beast's pleasure. No intelligent human being would consent to be a fool. No instructed person would be an ignoramus. No person of feelings and conscience would be selfish and base, even though they should be persuaded that the fool, the dunce, or the rascal is better satisfied with his lot than they are with theirs. They would not resign what they possess more than he for the most complete satisfaction of all desires which they have in common with him. If they ever fancy they would, it is only in case of unhappiness so extreme that to escape from it, they would exchange their lot for almost any other, however undesirable in their own eye. A being of higher faculties requires more to make him happy, is capable probably of more acute suffering, and is certainly accessible to it at more points. 英文安安，但是我这边是英文台哦。等一下，你不是还在玩 Ripple 吗？千万不要跟我说你千万不要问我要不要现在玩 Ripple。你这样的话，你这样诱惑我的话，我是不行的，我会马上。我这边算是英文哄睡台吗？我在念这个功利主义。Yeah, I'm reading on utilitarianism. So if you fall asleep, I don't blame you because I'm like. Yeah. A being of higher faculties requires more to make him happy, is capable probably of more acute suffering, and is certainly accessible to it at more points than one of an inferior type. But in spite of these liabilities, he can never really wish to sink into what he feels to be a lower grade of existence. We may give what explanation we please of this unwillingness. We may attribute it to a pride, a name which is given indiscriminately to some of the most and to some of the least estimable feelings of which mankind are capable. We may refer it to the love of liberty and personal independence, an appeal to which was with the Stoics one of the most effective means for the inculcation of it, to the love of power or to the love of excitement, both of which do really enter into and contribute to it. But its most appropriate appellation is a sense of dignity, which all human beings possess in one form or other, and in some, though by no means in exact proportion to their higher faculties, and which is so essential a part of the happiness of those in whom it is strong, that nothing which conflicts with it could be otherwise than momentarily an object of desire to them. Whoever suppose that this preference take place at the sacrifice of happiness, that the superior being in anything like equal circumstances is not happier than the inferior confounds the two very different ideas of happiness and content. It is indisputable that being whose capacities of enjoyment are low has the greatest chance of having them fully satisfied, and the highly endowed being will always feel that any happiness which he can look for, as the world is constituted, is imperfect. But he can learn to bear its imperfection if they are at all bearable, and they will not make him envy the being who is indeed unconscious of the imperfection, but only because he feels not at all the good which those imperfections qualify. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig is of a different opinion, it is because they only know their own side of the question. The other party to the comparison knows both sides. It may be objected that many who are capable of the higher pleasures occasionally, under the influence of temptation, postpone them to the lower. But this is quite compatible with a full appreciation of the intrinsic superiority of the higher. Men often, from infirmity of character, make their elections to near good, though they know it to be the less valuable. And this is no less when the choice is between two bodily pleasure, that when it is between bodily and mental, they pursue sensual indulgence to the injury of health, though perfectly aware that health is the greater good. It may be further objected that many would begin with youthful enthusiasm for everything noble, as they advance and years sink into indolence and selfishness. I do not believe that those who undergo this very common change voluntarily choose the lower description of pleasure in preference to the higher. I believe that before they default themselves exclusively to the one, they have already become incapable of the other. Capacity for the nobler feelings, as in most natures, are very tender plants. Capacity for the nobler feelings is in most nature a very tender plant easily killed, not only by hostile influence, but by mere want of the sustenance. And in the majority of young persons, it speedily dies away if the occupations to which their position in life has devoted them, and the society into which it has thrown them, are not favorable to keep that higher capacity in exercise. Men lose their high aspiration as they lose their intellectual tastes, because they have no time or opportunity for indulging them, and they addict themselves to inferior pleasure, not because they deliberately prefer them, but because they are either the only ones to which they have access, or the only ones which they are any longer capable of enjoying. It may question whether anyone who has remained equally susceptible to both classes of pleasure, if ever knowingly and calmly preferred the lower, though many in all ages have broken down in an ineffectual attempt to combine both. From this verdict of the only competent judge, I apprehend there can be no appeal. On the questions which is the best worth having of two pleasures, or which of two modes of existence is the most grateful to the feelings, apart from its moral attributes and from its consequences, the judgment of those who are qualified by knowledge of both, or if they differ, that of the majority among them, must be admitted as final. And there needs to be the less hesitation to accept this judgment respecting the quality of pleasure, since there is no other tribunal to be referred to even on the questions of quantity. What means are there of determining which is the acutest of the two pain, or the intensest of the two pleasurable sensation, except the general suffrage of those who are familiar with both? Neither pains nor pleasure are homogeneous, and pains is always heterogeneous with pleasure. What is there to decide whether a particular pleasure is worth purchasing at the cost of a particular pain, except the feeling and judgment of the experience? When, therefore, those feelings and judgment declare that pleasure derived from the higher faculties to be preferable in kind, apart from the questions of intensity, to those of which the animal nature, disjoined from the higher faculties, is susceptible, they are entitled and they subject to the same regards. I have dwelt on this point as being a necessary part of a perfectly just conception of utility or happiness, considered as the directive rule of human conduct. But it is by no means an indispensable condition to the acceptance of the utilitarian standard, for that standard is not the agent's own greatest happiness, but the greatest amount of happiness altogether. And if it may possibly be doubted whether a noble character is always the happier for its nobleness, there can be no doubt that it makes other people happier, and that the world in general is immensely gained by it. Utilitarianism, therefore, could only attain its end by the general cultivation of nobleness of character, even if each individual will only benefit by the nobleness of others, and his own, so far as happiness is concerned, was a sheer deduction from the benefits. But the bare unification of such an absurdity as this last renders refutation superfluous. Need to take 1 minute break. 1 minute break because I'm so dry. Let's drink something. Okay, let me take a 2 minutes break, alright? 2 minutes break. 2 minutes break. 2 minutes break. Okay, we can continue. Okay, we can continue now. According to the great happiness principle, as above explained, the ultimate ends with reference to and for the sake of which all the other things are desirable, whether we're considering our own good or that of other people as an existence exempt as far as possible from pain, and as rich as possible in enjoyment, both in point of quantity and quality. The test of quality and the rule for measuring it against quantity being the preference felt by those who, in their opportunities of experience, to which must be added the habits of self-consciousness and self-observation, are best furnished with the means of comparison. This being according to the utilitarian opinion, the end of human action is necessarily also the standard of morality. I'm so sleepy right now. Which may accordingly be defined the rules and precepts for human conduct, by the observance of which an existence such as has been described might be, the greatest extent possible, secured to all mankind, and not to them only, but so far as the nature of things admits, to the whole sentient creation. Okay, let's do a little wrap up in here. So, just now, in the last wrap up we have, Mills just say, okay, some people might say if we only live for pleasure, then what we are different from animals. That is not a good rebuttal for the whole utilitarianism theory, simply because in terms of the quality, in terms of quality, there is a huge difference. There's a huge difference. So what maybe for the pigs, they're happy to eat whatever they can find as long as it fills up their belly, no matter it's grass, no matter it's trash, no matter what it is. But for human, if they want to enjoy the pleasure, you won't enjoy the same pleasure as pig when it comes to eating dirt. So people might think, I need chicken, I need meat, I need a foie gras, or I need a steak. Yeah, and also they add in the nobleness of character. Yeah, so people sometimes might choose, okay, maybe I will just slack off instead of studying hard, instead of improving myself, because even though improving myself, studying, or being a good person is a higher utility and give more pleasure because how hard I can access. Yeah, for example, okay, I can just sit in my room watching like TikTok, Netflix, instead of doing something productive, or like engaging in something that's really hard, such as politics. So people would choose that, they will, but they are at that point, it's because that kind of hello Loun is, I'll call you Loun. Your name is a bit too long for me. So in that extent, even though people might choose some lower quality pleasure, doesn't mean that they are fulfilled by that. It's more like at that point, they only have access to that lower level of pleasure. Yeah, similar to people who, okay, someone might be, okay, I'm happily enjoying my instant ramen here, then going to a really, really fancy restaurant. Why would I choose that? Is because either the fancy restaurant is too hard, too expensive for me to go, or I don't know that kind of cuisine exists. Yeah? In terms of, let's say, okay, I'd rather watch Netflix than going to, let's say, politics, or improving myself. It's because it's easier for me to access watching Netflix and being not productive for the whole weekend than improving myself. Even though I know improving myself give me better pleasure, but that's temporary and kind of like you're in a bad form. It's not because you naturally pick them. Yeah, they have no time or opportunities for indulging the higher pleasure, so to speak. Yeah. So it's not, for me, it's not perfect, because for me, I do have access to like higher pleasure, but sometimes I just want to, chill out, rest, and even though they might not give the same pleasure to me, and being selfish is also not a good one, because some higher quality pleasure, such as being a noble character, gives you more pleasure to the society and not just by yourself. Here's a little tiny tip here, show that utilitarianism, it's not a selfish moral doctrine. Because he start mentioning something, being a noble character might harm yourself a little bit, but it gives more to other people, including yourself, and you benefit from other people being noble. Yeah? Okay. Against this doctrine, however, arise another class of the objector who say that happiness in any form cannot be the rational purpose of human life and action, because in the first place it is unattainable, and they contemptuously ask, what right hast thou to be happy? A question where Mr. Khalil clenched by the addition, what right, short time ago, hast thou even to be? Next they say that man can do without happiness, that all noble human beings have felt this, and could not have become noble but by learning the lessons of Entsagen, or renunciation, which lessons, fully learned and submitted to, they affirm to be the beginning and necessary condition of all virtues. Okay, this I might need to have a look what's going on here, because they kind of quote other people's work. They quote other people's work, okay? The first of these objections would go to the root of the matter where it well-founded. For if no happiness is to be had at all by human beings, the attainment of it cannot be the end of morality or of any rational conduct, though, even in that case, something might still be said for the utilitarian theory, since utility includes not solely the pursuit of happiness, but the prevention or mitigation of unhappiness. And if the former aim to be chimerical, there will be all the greater scope and more imperative need for the later, so long at least as humankind think fit to live and do not take refuge in the simultaneous act of suicide recommended under certain conditions by novelists. When, however, it is thus positively asserted to be impossible that human life should be happy, the assertion, if not something like a verbal quibble, is at least an exaggeration. If by happiness be meant a continuity of highly pleasurable excitement, it is evident enough that this is impossible. A state of exalt pleasure lasts only moments, or in some cases, and with some intermissions, hours or days, and is the occasional brilliant flash of enjoyment, not its permanent and steady flame. Of this, the philosophers who have taught that happiness is the end of life were as fully aware as those who taught them. The happiness which they meant was not a life of rapture, but moments of such, in an existence made up of few and transitory pain, many and various pleasure, with a decided predominance of the active over the passive, and having as the foundation of the whole not to expect more from life than it is capable of bestowing. The life thus composed, to those who have been fortunate enough to obtain it, has always appeared worthy of the name of happiness, and such an existence is even now the lot of many during some considerable portion of their lives. The present wretched education and wretched social arrangement are the only real hindrance of its being attainable by almost all. Okay, I need to reread this paragraph because the root matter is well found, for if no happiness is to be had by all human beings, it can be and okay. In that case, something might still be said later. So, not solely pursuit of happiness, prevention. Okay. So this is another objection: is if we treat pleasure as the ultimate goal of our morale, but a lot of pleasure it's monopolized. So for example, if I enjoy a cup of water, some kids in Africa might not enjoy that because I used up his resource. Or something like, okay, I can attain higher level of pleasure, but that will be taken away some other people's. But if we treat it, because as per we speak in the earlier, as we said earlier, the ultimate goal of utilitarian theory is either pleasure or the prevention of pain. So if my pleasure causing someone to miss out that pleasure, which actually embrace the pain, so it would be a contradiction. Because if you enjoy something and other people has to lose that, then what's the point? That's no real pleasure. Or if you have to calculate in a whole, then no one gains. Then how is it good when no one gains anything? Yeah? Objectors perhaps may doubt whether human beings, if taught to consider happiness as the end of life, will be satisfied with such a moderate share of it. So what he also means, the second point is, because life is not always happy. You got pain somewhere here and there. Sometimes you're just not being happy. Sometimes you just didn't get what you want, even though it's the highest level of pleasure. So does that mean if we seek in pleasure as the end of life, so we have to accept the fact that our life being good is just a sparkle here and there. It's not an always happy thing. It's not something that exists in here whenever we practice this kind of idea or philosophy in our life. But we have to accept the fact that we take this doctrine, enjoy tad bits of it instead of long term of it. Is that really true? So it sounds like mediocre, you know? Yeah. The main constituents of a satisfied life appear to be two, either of which by itself is often found sufficient for the purpose: tranquility and excitement. With much tranquility, many find that they can be content with the very little pleasure. With much excitement, many can reconcile themselves to considerable quantity of pain. This is assuredly no inherent impossibility in enabling even the mass of mankind to unite both, since the two are so far from being incompatible that they are in natural alliance. The prolongation of either being a preparation for and exciting a wish to for the others. It is only those in whom indolence amounts to a vice that does not desire excitement after an interval of repose. It is only those in whom the need of excitement is a disease that feel the tranquility which follows excitement dull and insipid, instead of pleasurable in direct proportion to the excitement which preceded. When people who are tolerably fortunate in their outward lot do not find in life sufficient enjoyment to make it valuable to them, the cause generally is caring for nobody but themselves. To those who have neither public nor private affection, the excitement of life are more curtailed, and in any case dwindle in value as the times approach when all selfish interests must be terminated by death. While those who leave after them objects of personal affections, and especially those who have also cultivated a fellow feeling with the collective interests of mankind, retain as lively an interest in life on the eve of death as in the vigor of youth and health. Next to selfishness, the principal cause which makes life unsatisfactory is what of mental cultivation. A cultivated mind, I do not mean that of a philosopher, but any mind to which the fountain of knowledge has been opened, and which has been taught in any tolerable degree to exercise its faculties, finds source of inexhaustible interest in all that surrounds it, in the objects of nature, the achievement of art, the imagination of poetry, the incidents of history, the ways of mankind past and present, and their prospects in the future. It is possible, indeed, to become indifferent to all these, and that too without having exhausted to 1,000 part of it, but only when one has had from the beginning no moral or human interest in these things, and has sought in them only gratification of curiosity. Now, there's absolutely no reason in the nature of things why an amount of mental culture sufficient to give an intelligent interest in these objects of contemplation should not be the inheritance of everyone born in a civilized country. As little is there an inherent necessity that any human being should be a selfish egotist, devoid of every feeling or care but those which center in his own miserable individuality. Something far superior to this is sufficiently common evil, even now, to give ample earnest of what the human species may be made. Genuine private affection and a sincere interest in the public goods are possible though in unequal degrees to every rightly brought up human being. In a world in which there is so much to interest, so much to enjoy, and so much also to correct and improve, everyone who has this moderate amount of moral and intellectual requisites is capable of an existence which may be called enviable, and unless such a person, through bad laws or subjection to the will of others, is denied the liberty to use the source of happiness within his reach, he will not fail to find this enviable existence. If he escape the positive evils of life, the great source of physical and mental suffering, such as indigence, disease, and the unkindness, worthlessness, or premature loss of objects of affection, the main stress of the problem lies, therefore, in contest with these calamities, from which it is a rare good fortune entirely to escape, which, as things now are, cannot be obviated, and also often cannot be in any material degree mitigated. Yet no one those opinion deserves a moment's consideration can doubt that most of the great positive evils of the world are in themselves removable, and will, if human affairs continue to improve, be in the end reduced within narrow limits. Poverty, in any sense implying suffering, may be completely extinguished by the wisdom of society, combined with the good sense and providence of individuals. Even that most intractable of enemies, disease, may be indefinitely reduced in dimensions by good physical and moral education and proper control of noxious influence, while the progress of science hold out a promise for the future of still more direct conquest over this detestable foe, and every advance in that direction relieve us from some, not only of the chance which cut short our own lives, but, what concerns us still more, which deprives us of those in whom our happiness is wrapped up. As for the vicissitude of fortune and other disappointment connected with worldly circumstances, they are principally the effects either of gross imprudence, of ill-regulated desire, or of bad or imperfect social institution. All the great source, in short, of human sufferings are in a great degree, many of them almost entirely conquerable by human care and effort, and though their removal is grievously slow, through a long succession of generations will perish in the breach before the conquest is completed, and this world become all that, if will and knowledge were not wanting, it might easily be made. Yet every mind sufficiently intelligent and generous to bear a part, however small and unconspicuous, in the endeavor will draw a noble enjoyment from the contest itself, which he would not for any bribe in the form of selfish indulgence consent to be without. Oh God, I'm so tired. 我帮你们在念书的时候，自己也差点睡着了。我跟你说，我在念书，但是我不想睡。你要听英文听到睡吗，不绿？And this leads to true estimation of what is said by the objectors concerning the possibility and the obligation of learning to do without happiness. Unquestionably, it is possible to do without happiness. It is done involuntarily by 19/20 of mankind, even in those parts of our present world which at least deep in barbarianism, and its offense has to be done voluntarily by the hero or the martyr, for sake of something which he prizes more than his individual happiness, But this something, what is it? Even unless the happiness of others, or some of the requisites of happiness, it is noble to be capable of resigning entirely one's own portion of happiness or chances of it, but, after all, this self-sacrifice must be for some end. It is not its own end, and if we are told that is its end, it's not happiness, virtue, which is better than happiness, I ask, would the sacrifice be made if the hero or martyr did not believe that it would earn for others immunity from similar sacrifice? Yes, no, I'm not letting you fall asleep. Would it be made if he thought that his renunciation of happiness for himself would produce no fruit for any of his fellow creature, but to make their lots like his, and place them also in the condition of persons who have renounced happiness? All honor to those who can abnegate for themselves the personal enjoyment of life, when by such renunciation they contribute worthily to increase the amount of happiness in the world. But he who does it, or professes to do it, for any other purpose, is no more deserving of admiration than the ascetic mount on his pillar. He may be an inspiriting proof of what man can do, but assuredly not an example of what they should. Though it is only in the very imperfect state of the world's arrangement that anyone can best serve the happiness of others by the absolute sacrifice of his own, yet so long as the world is in that imperfect state, I fully acknowledge that the readiness to make such a sacrifice is the highest virtue which can be found in man. I will add that in this condition of world, paradoxical as the assertion may be, the conscious ability to do without happiness gives the best prospect of realizing such happiness as attainable. For nothing except the conscious can raise a person above the chance of life by making him feel that, let fate and fortune do their worst, they have no power to subduct him, which, once felt, frees him from excess of anxiety concerning the evils of life and enables him, like many a Stoic in the worst time of the Roman Empire, to cultivate in tranquility the source of satisfaction accessible to him, without concerning himself about the uncertainty of their duration any more than about their inevitable end. Meanwhile, let utilitarians never cease to claim the morality of self-devotion as a possession which belongs by as good a right to them as either to the Stoic or to the Transcendentalism. The utilitarian morality thus recognize in human beings the power of sacrificing their own greatest good for the good of others. It only refuses to admit that the sacrifice is itself a good. A sacrifice which does not increase or tend to increase the sum total of happiness is considered as waste. The only self-renunciation which is applauded is devotion to the happiness, or to some of the means of happiness, of others, either of mankind collectively or of individuals within the limits imposed by the collective interests of mankind. I must again repeat what the assailants of utilitarianism seldom have the justice to acknowledge, that the happiness which formed the utilitarian standard of what is right in conduct is not the agent's own happiness, but that of all concerned, as between his own happiness and that of others. Utilitarianism requires him to be as strictly impartial as a disinterested and benevolent spectator. In the golden rule of Jesus of Nazareth, we read the complete spirit of the ethics of utility, to do as one would be done by, and to love one's neighbors as oneself. constitute the ideal perfection of utilitarian morality. As the meaning of making the nearest approach to this ideal, utility would enjoin, first, the law and social arrangement should place the happiness, or as speaking practically it may be called, the interests of every individual as nearly as possible in harmony which with the interests of the whole. And secondly, that education and opinion which have so vast power over human character should use the power as to establish in the mind of every individual an indissoluble association between his own happiness and the good of the whole, especially between his own happiness and the practice of such modes of conduct, negative and positive, as regard for the universal happiness prescribes, so that not only he may be unable to conceive the possibility of happiness to himself, consistently with conduct opposed to the general good, but also that a direct impulse to promote the general good may be in every individual one of the habitual motives of actions. And the sentiments connected therewith may fill a large and prominent place in every human being's sentient existence. If the unpunchness of the utilitarian morality represented it to its own mind in its true character, I know not what recommendation possessed by any other morality they could possibly affirm to be wanting to it. What more beautiful or more exalt development of human nature any other ethical system can be supposed to foster, or what springs of action not accessible to the utilitarian? Such systems rely on for giving effect to their mandates. It's really hard to wrap up because he made a lot of he trying to do it like logical step by step. So yeah, on the other hand, people just say, okay, it's the second objection to the if you give and take, you give and take. If you give something to the world, take something, then there's no gain. And if your happiness creates some pain or displeasure of the other people, then your whole theory will be useless because that's like literally everything. So they think pleasure is a sacred good, a very scarce good that if you get some, people will lose some. But in that case, if we have a look, there's a lot of people sacrifice themselves. Are they really going for their own pleasure? Because pleasure, you can't enjoy any pleasure when you died. Now, let us just say, but human, their nobleness, it's also based on pleasure. So what they think is, if I suffer, can push the whole society or the people around me away from this kind of danger or pain, then it's actually worth it because I am increasing the pleasure of the whole society. Yeah, and unless and with this kind of, if we encourage people to think more about others or the greater happiness instead of just individual happiness, the whole society, imagine what it can be. People will sacrifice or help out each other just because they bring better utility to the society than ourselves. Yeah? So that is like in short, but if you're really interested, you can just look it up. That's my take on this. Yeah? The objectors to utilitarianism cannot always be charged with representing it in a discreditable light. On the contrary, those among them who entertain anything like a just idea of its disinterested character sometimes find fault with its standard as being too high for humanity. They say it's accepting too much to require that people shall always act from the inductment of promoting the general interest of society, but this is to mistake the very meaning of standards of moral, and to confound the rule of actions with the motive of it. It is the business of ethics to tell us what are our duties, or by what test we may know them, but no system of ethics require that the sole motive of all we do shall be a feeling of duty. On the contrary, 99/100 of all our actions are done from other motives, and rightly so done. If the rule of duty does not condemn them, it is more unjust to utilitarianism that this particular misapprehension should be made a ground of objection to it, inasmuch as utilitarian moralists have gone beyond almost all others in affirming that motive has nothing to do with the morality of the actions. Though much with the worth of the agents, he who saves a fellow creature from drowning does what is morally right, whether his motive be duty or the hope of being paid for his trouble. He who betrays the friend and trusts him is guilty of a crime, even if his object be to serve another friend to whom he is under great obligation. But to speak only of actions done from the motive of duty and in direct obedience to principle, this is a misapprehension of the utilitarian mode of thought. Conceive it as implying that people should fix their minds on so wide a generality as the world or society at large. The great majority of good actions intended not for the benefits of the world, but for that of individual, of which the good of the world is made up, and the thoughts of the most virtuous men need not, on these occasions, travel beyond the particular persons concerned, except so far as is necessarily to assure himself that in benefiting them he is not violating the rights, that is, the legitimate and authorized expectation of any others. The multiplication of happiness, as according to the utilitarian ethics, the objects of virtue, the occasions on which any person, except 1 in 1,000, has it in his power to do this on an extended scale. In other words, to be a public benefactor, all are but exceptional, and on these occasions alone is he called on to consider public utility. In every other cases, private utilities, the interest or happiness of some few person, is all he has to attend to. OK， 今天的话就到这里吧。Yeah, today I'm just doing a trial to see if I can handle like more than 2 hours. But right now it's 1.5 hours and I'm like really sleepy right now. But yeah, but actually it makes me feel better and easier. Not gonna lie. Not saying that I want to want to slack off from streaming, but do you find that because I really want to read this book like for a long time ago, I just don't have the sense or like just don't feel it. I need to make myself a bit quiet, clear my mind, start focusing on it. But it raised some good points. So the last paragraph I just read, it's about, okay, so people will say, then if you're using the general society or the happiness, interest, pleasure of the other people, override your self-interest, that's against human nature. And his action, those heroes and martyrs, does not benefit them at all. But they somehow still do it. So that will be like against the pleasure as the first principle, because if that's the case, everyone will be forced to sacrifice for a greater good. But to what extent? But for Mills, he just say, okay, being a hero, being a martyr, being someone who sacrifices your own pleasure for everyone, it's impossible. Most of the people, you can't. What he's saying here is, we should use consequence, not intention, to judge it. Because if you judge them by intention, we have to admit most of the people act on self-interest. But it depends on the end good. Even, for example, if he jump into the water and save a cat, maybe he just being a good man. Maybe he'll see that and think like, oh, if I save that cat, someone gonna pay me and I can go to the news. But in the end, they still save that cat. Yeah, they still save the cat. So that still be a good thing. Yeah, a good thing. So, and also he made a disclaimer in here. It's okay, utilitarianism as a guideline. As a guideline. And it's not like you do everything you must according to that guideline. It's not a law, it's just a suggestion to set up a standard. If you think, okay, so we need to do everything based on how to give him more, how to give out more to other people, that is just plain stupid. Just plain stupid. Because it's a guideline. Yeah? Okay, for today, I probably will just end it here because my mouth is so dry and I'm so tired right now. I mean, I do focus a lot and rethink. I might do a bit more reading after the stream, but for now, I will just call this a day because I'm just too sleepy. Alright, so, okay, let me switch and then see if I can raid anyone. Yep, today I actually was like struggling should I go to stream because I'm like really tired today. But on the other hand, I feel like I should actually do something, so that's why I stream a bit. Okay. Pharaoh Friday. Okay, how about we just raid a hot girl, Kate Lena, doing a just chat stream. Is she chatting? Let me have me a moment, let me listen to her. What is she doing? Is she reading something? Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, let's rate someone who's reading some. Okay. Oh no, she's Russian. Okay, that's Russian. I'm pretty sure you guys don't understand Russian. Last stream forever, last stream before break. Spooky Scary Friday. Steam sucks. Watching clips. Doing a just chat. Okay, but he's not speaking English. God, cool. I'm looking for someone who's calmer. Is she speaking? No, she's speaking German. It's there like any English speaking streamer that is streaming right now? Okay, I'm gonna go for her. Holy shit, she's too big. No, she's too big. No, that's too big. That's a bit too big. Nope. Okay, I'll be really careful. Who should I raid? Oh no, God. No, God. Anyone doing just chat that's speaking English? Please give me a English just chat streamer, please, who is chill and like not doing something crazy and speaking English. It's really hard to find someone speaking English, not gonna lie. Playing Apex. Any English speaker, please give me an English speaker. Give me one goddamn English speaker. Okay, she's too big. No, one English speaker. Just one will be enough. One. Uh. Okay, she's doing a cooking stream. So guys, we're gonna raid Jimmy Dibblins. She's doing a cooking stream. And wish you guys a good nap because she's also sleeping. Yeah, I need to go to sleep too, yeah. And thank you for staying with me and hope I probably will do it again, but not sure when. Yeah.